These are oversized nightstands with a matching vanity that I bought at auction, sight unseen. I took the risk because I'd worked on a very similar set before, and I believed there was walnut veneer underneath, something I hadn't been able to restore then, but I was hoping to now. I first had to remove everything that didn't belong on the surface. The tops were covered in this black peel and stick tile, so I started by using a heat gun and a scraper to remove that. I used Goo Gone to help remove the remaining adhesive left over from those tiles, along with a Carbide scraper, which also helped lift some of the top coat finish. I then cleaned the tops with TSP Alternative and started sanding with 120 grit mesh to see how the finish would respond. It didn't take me long to realize the veneer wasn't walnut. You can see this in the corners as the surface starts to open up. At that point, I did make a deliberate decision, though, to keep going and attempt a full restoration anyways. Because sanding wasn't very effective and because I wanted to avoid damaging the veneer, I decided to try some stripper. This finish was being particularly stubborn, so I decided to use some mineral spirits and a Carbide scraper to remove a little bit more of it. After that, I was left with a little bit of the finish still and some of the stains, so I decided to go in with my 120 grit mesh sandpaper again. Then I hand sanded with 180 grit sandpaper. And as you can see, while I don't have footage of that, when I did it, I did end up with a couple areas of burn through. So at this point, I needed to see whether the sand through areas on the top could actually be repaired and disguised well enough to justify continuing with a full wood restoration on the rest of the set. So I neutralized the red tone in the mahogany veneer with a green wash. And then to establish a consistent base so I could do the color corrections, I used a natural stain and finishing oil. Following that, I used a variety of repair materials, blend-all stick, toner, sanding sealer, you name it. I threw every technique I have at it. And in the end, it took me, I would say, at least an hour, if not a little bit longer, to complete these repairs. Well, we'll see. After everything had dried, I felt the repairs were good enough to move forward. But I didn't want to repeat that process across the entire set. So instead of committing to a full restoration, I decided to carry forward with a modified design direction. My plan was to go with a dipped look, with the bottom 2/3 of the nightstands painted green and the top third the restored wood. As I started sanding the top of the second nightstand, I sanded through the veneer. And that's when I started undoing what I had already finished. Because there were already multiple oil-based layers on this surface, I used my Carbide scraper because sanding at that point would have just smeared everything together. After scraping, I wiped everything back with mineral spirits just to remove any remaining residue. From there, I addressed any damaged areas with wood filler. Once the wood filler had hardened, I scuff sanded everything to level the surface and prepare it for primer and paint. And to ensure everything would look cohesive still, I made sure the tops of all 3 pieces were sanded down to bare veneer. Once everything was sanded down, I taped everything off that I needed to. Before moving on, I wiped that tape with water to seal the edge and prevent bleed through. With that much exposed veneer and filler across the entire set, sealing wasn't optional. The first primer here is clear shellac. It isolates any remaining stain, oil, or tannins in the mahogany and locks everything down so the finish behaves properly. After the shellac dried, I sanded it down lightly with a 400 grit sandpaper and wiped it back again with a microfiber cloth. After that, I primed again, this time with a black Aqualock primer. Using a dark primer like this gives me a consistent base and means I'm not fighting the finish color later. I end up using less coats of paint. I applied both primers with a foam roller to keep the surface smooth and controlled. And from there, I moved on to the paint, which is a Sherwin-Williams Tricorn black in a satin finish. I use a microfiber roller and a foam brush. After 2 coats of this emerald urethane trim enamel paint, which by the way, doesn't require a top coat, I pulled back the tape and let everything settle. Then I turned to the vanity drawers. The original bottoms were thin and cardboard looking with these pieces that you could pull out, so I wanted to improve them. I cut the liners using my Olfa mat, rotary cutter, and ruler to keep the edges clean and consistent, and then wiped down the inserts with a tack cloth so that the liners would stick properly without anything underneath. I sanded the edges of the nightstand drawers to move any paint that had gotten on them, and then wiped those edges and the drawer interiors down with mineral spirits so everything was clean and consistent. These drawers didn't actually have hardware. They were designed to be pulled from underneath. But once everything was painted black, the drawer fronts read as large, flat surfaces. So adding hardware wasn't necessary, but it was intentional. I chose edge pulls so I wouldn't have to drill the faces in case anyone decided they didn't want hardware in the future, and to add just enough contrast without changing the character of the piece. I measured carefully, marked the location of the holes with a punch, and pre-drilled using a drill bit slightly smaller than the screws. Once the hardware was in, I waxed the drawer bottoms and glides so everything moved smoothly. And at that point, the work was done. What started as a restoration attempt became a reset and then a redesign. Each change in direction came from paying attention to quality, effort, and what the materials would realistically allow. And that's the part of refinishing that doesn't always show up in a before and after. Let me know in the comments about projects you've done that maybe had to change direction a few times. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're interested in more videos like this one.